Welcome to the State of Survival, and today me and Red are going to be talking about DayZ Frostline with our guest AlwaysStreams.
Yeah, it's really good to be here. And I'm really looking forward to Frostline and seeing what it actually brings.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on the show to talk about Frostline. You cover DayZ for a wide range of topics, but for our viewers, what do you bring to the table on this discussion for DayZ Frostline?
I suppose that depends who you ask, but I do try to provide tutorial videos and I also try to give opinions and takes. I go into the history of DayZ. I've got quite a bit of experience on DayZ playing since it was a mod and then standalone, and I was with it all the way through early access. So I've sort of watched the game evolve as time has went on, and then eventually into its DLC map with Livonia, and now with the much anticipated Sakhal.
That's one of the reasons why we have you on our show, but I really want to know, what are your impressions of the DayZ Frostline map Shakal so far?
So far, like from what they've released, it looks really good. It looks like it's going to be a take that at least half of the community hasn't really had a chance to dive into yet. Obviously, we've had the mouse and the PC, but this looks like it's going to be a version of the DayZ maps that's actually completely unique, completely new. They look like they're expanding on systems that have already been there. And based on what the DayZ devs have done previously, they tend to take anything that's related to a mod and really expand it, make it a lot more expansive, and add their own little twist to it. So I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what they actually do with what we know is going to essentially be DLC in the near future.
Yeah, and I actually love the fact that we have been given these little snippets of information from someone finding the trademark for Frostline to a little bit of information coming out from DayZ and some of their live streams or other media to the DayZ Unite event, and finally to the 4 devs. It might be even the 5 devlogs out already when this finally posts. It's really cool to see Shakal, or DayZ Frostline as it's called, go from this really mysterious thing we knew nothing about to being a full-fledged expansion being announced with a bunch of media, a bunch of hype. And I'm actually excited for this map overall because it does a lot of things that a lot of players already wanted to see. People wanted to see something more intricate, a smaller, compact area, but actually changing the scene up. They didn't want to see another Livonia or another Shanaris map come out. So this is really a pretty cool map so far.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that just to be the kind of wet blanket of the crew, as I usually am, they really played the hype train up on this, and it's not that necessarily they pushed it, but with the DayZ community, you put out a few little tidbits, a couple of breadcrumbs, and people just run with it. And we saw the same thing with DayZ 2.0, and somebody found a little bit of something mentioned somewhere, and suddenly it's coming out soon, but it's a big mystery. It was the same thing here, where, like you said, somebody found the trademark for Frostline, and maybe another little tidbit, and all of a sudden it's, oh my gosh, what's this going to be, and whatever else. But one thing that I saw was Sakhal. I mean, it's a new map ish because they're basing it on an old Arma map. And so I'm interested, AlwaysStreams, and have you played the map that this was based on in Arma 3? And do you really think it matters that they did a bit of recycling? And obviously, they looks like they made quite a few changes, but in your opinion, does that really matter?
So I have actually played the Tanoa map when it was released, which is obviously the map that you're talking about and referring to, and it was a good map. I enjoyed the map, but obviously with there being so many different options, I never put as much time into it as I'd like. Now I know that this map is coming out, but based on what they've done and how they've released everything in the different biomes, because it does look like they're going to have volcanoes and a sort of different atmosphere to the snow that we've seen on the mountains and everything else, it seems as though they've adjusted enough of Sakhal for me to really want to dive in and see and experience it. And also, the thing that we can sort of take from maps like, a map, their main DLC, which is Livonia, is that they tend to adjust it enough for people to really get something out of it. So with that, they had a lot of environmental storytelling, which I'm a huge fan of. You could see where they had the last stands at the police stations. You could see the derelict buildings and how they were sort of taken out and knocked down. And I think that what they're going to do is they're going to take the map that was already there, and I think they're going to change it quite a bit and sort of make it so people want to play. So I don't think the fact that the base of the map was already in a previous game really makes that much of a difference, especially considering it's quite an old game. And when you think of the growth of DayZ itself, which has been like, I worked out it's been roughly 17 to 20 million players since like 2019, with it, like the past 2 years obviously gain of 4 million each year, and then the previous year nearly 4 million. So with these new players coming in, I assume a lot of them haven't actually experienced this Tanoa map at all. And with the changes that I can see in the photos, they've made huge, vast improvements from what I can see. The atmosphere, the feel, and everything is completely different. I think that's going to be a really exciting map for people to dive into, and I don't personally think the fact that they've reused it is that big of a deal. Although, it would always be nice to get a newer map, a newer foundation to sort of build upon.
Yeah, because I love visuals. It's like Tanoa is like a clay doll that just has no face, no features, or whatever else. And they're changing the clay doll enough for it to be unique in its own right. And that's actually kind of exciting that they're not just taking a ready to ship map from Arma 3 and making it into, so this is all you get. They're actually making it their own. And I'm down with that. So, always, how do you feel about the harsher survival elements coming into Frostline, such as heating frozen foods, dealing with the blizzards, and possibly some nasty volcanic areas?
Adding things like volcanoes and or maybe just a volcanic area, whatever it is that they've decided to go with, it adds a bit of variety and it gives players sort of replayability, because that's the thing with DayZ. You have to remember that this map has to be good because it is essentially a spawn, die, repeat game. That's all you do. There's no like level progression involved. There's nothing you can build up. You just sort of live a life. And they have to make that living experience as good as possible. And I think that's what a lot of other games or the survival games sort of fail at. And I think DayZ, the way they stand out and focus on these things specifically, that sort of puts them ahead of everybody else. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy other survival games and I play a lot of other survival games, but nothing really hits the mark quite like DayZ. And I think that's sort of been shown in the love that Namalska's got. Namalsk its biggest thing was survival. It was never PvP, it was never anything else. It was always survival, atmosphere, and that's what so many people gravitated towards the game to watch. It's what they loved. And I think that going the Sakhal route they have and adding more dangers and making it more exciting to survive, I think that's probably going to be what separates it from, say, Livonia, which didn't really have any of these things added. Because I did a video and it was sort of Livonia has flopped, why Livonia flopped. Whereas I sort of explained, well, there were a few things that maybe didn't go quite as well. I wouldn't call it a flop, but I was making a video. But you could tell it was a passion project. They had a lot of things in there, but one of the biggest things they didn't really add was mechanics. I know they added a bear and so on and so forth, but there was nothing to really differentiate Livonia from Chernarus. And obviously recently that's changed like dramatically with the bunker, which is incredible, but at the time of release there wasn't anything to really capture the audience. And I think now what they've done is they've went down the route that they needed to go to that first time, and from the dev blogs, as you've mentioned, they look like they are absolutely nailing everything. They're giving the players exactly what they want. And, I am a player. First and foremost, I am a player. I make content. I love making content, but I make content because I love the game. I'm a player. And for me, this is just so enticing. I just want to jump into it. I want to see what it offers. And I'm really excited for it.
Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate here, and I'm going to jump out of my own skin because I
Oh god.
love harsher survival mechanics. I adore them, actually. But let's go ahead and play the alternate card of a lot of people do consider this a PvP game. A lot of people like it being a PvP game. And a lot of people may consider the frozen food and the harsh blizzards and stuff kind of mechanics they don't want to see in official DayZ. They're okay with it being in modded also because they can change it quite easily. But with it being in official, it's quite difficult because, just they don't want to have it. They want to have that experience of the PvP, that live, die, repeat, but they live, die, repeat to always go to a PvP fight.
So I think that's really interesting that you bring that up, because I actually had a conversation with somebody the other day who said that they thought that this was just going to be a PvP map because of the size. It's 80 square kilometers, which is smaller than Livonia's 163 kilometers squared, and
It's
Chernarus's
83.
225, I believe.
The extra 3 kilometers matters.
It does.
Okay. Yeah, no, well, I'm not one to criticize size. So the thing about that is you have Namalsk, and Namalsk is only what 30, I think it is,
Yeah,
maybe
it's
30
pretty
kilometers,
small.
and yeah, it's never been that big of an issue. There's always been quite a well balanced gameplay for me. Nobody's ever just been purely PvP. And I think for anybody who wants the PvP experience, there are two of the maps that basically offer the same experience, more or less. So adding something else for the extra players who just want to focus on survival, or even want to make the PvP more difficult, because once you play DayZ for a while, it does become a little bit easy. There's a big learning curve, but once you get over that curve, there's no real difficulty there at all. So adding a map that makes you have to think about things while you engage in PvP doesn't necessarily remove PvP. It just makes it more exciting and challenging in a way. So I'd say that it doesn't make that much of an issue. Plus, the thing about the DayZ devs, they always make sure that server owners have ways to adjust things and to make their own community servers. So I don't think it'll ever be that much of a problem for many people. You'll still have lots of PvP servers, and people will still be having lots of fun on there that way.
So as somebody who coming at this as a player, played Namalsk a fair amount. Honestly, the harsher environmentals and survival aspects of it, not a big fan of myself. Now, I like to play more on the survival side than the PvP side. But that being said, I think that having the baseline making it harder to survive because of the temperatures and the frozen food and extra steps you have to take, building a fire every 10 minutes where you're running from fire to stay warm. We all know that even though that's going to be released as part of the vanilla DLC when it comes out, it's going to be about 30 whole seconds before modders come in and throw little mods in to undo them, because players are going to complain, it's too cold, it takes too long to heat up the food. And it's like, okay, here's a disable frozen food mod. So that's going to balance it out for the community as well. I think, having the baseline make it harder. And interesting, that I'm really interested in the volcanic area and kind of how, if it's going to be like active volcanic where suddenly you're going from freezing to burning or something of that nature, who knows? But making it harder there, and then if they, like you said, Dump, if they have mechanisms that you can turn those down via the JSON config, or people come in with some simple mods just to be able to tweak it, I think that's gonna fix it for the community. You make a little
Yeah.
something for everybody.
Yeah, both of you hit on both of those points perfectly. Is that DayZ allows modding, and they introduced JSONs for console and PC server owners to change things. So whether or not you like all of the features, I'm sure DayZ is going to allow you to control the majority of them in some capacity through JSONs, or modders will fix it. But let's go ahead and just take a step back and let's talk about the trailers, the teasers, the devlogs, and what you think about the terrain, not the map itself, but the terrain layout of the Sakhal area. How do you think it's going to be overall, based off what we've seen from the trailers, teasers, and devlogs?
I think it's definitely going to be more difficult to traverse. I don't think people. So with Chinaris, there's obviously a huge hill. It's like up a giant mountain, but people don't really feel that because of how it's sort of structured. Whereas with Sakhal, I think it would be more apparent. It'll definitely be more evident. I think people are going to take a lot longer to get around, which is another reason I don't actually think the size is that big of a deal. There's going to be a lot of escalation. So I think players are going to sort of have to adjust their play styles in order to get from one area to another. And I also think that it's going to change the gameplay as a whole because of how the map actually is, which I think is going to be a really fun and interesting experience.
And that brings up an interesting point. With the higher elevations and other things going on in Frostbite, have you thought about how the snow looks like it's accumulating? Because from what I have seen in some of the developer footage and some of the dev blogs, it looks like the snow becomes thicker and thicker as you go up the mountain.
Yeah, I've seen what appears to be that as well. I think that's quite an interesting approach if they actually do it. I don't know how much of that is just sort of how it looks, because obviously, as it sort of elevates, they have to add snow, like the scenic purposes, for aesthetic purposes. Sorry, so I don't really know if that's going to be like a full feature, but if it is going to be a full feature, then that will be really cool. And again, it sort of adds to what I said before about you having to change your strategy depending on where you are. And then there's different biomes, which to me, although that's the same biome, just adding that adds sort of an element of difficulty and an element of consideration as you're traversing around, and you really have to put some thought into what you're actually going to do. And based on what they've released on the dev blog as well, the way the snow sort of settles and everything else, and it's always pointing at the top, I think it'll be a really interesting thing to see how it actually pans out.
This is an interesting situation here because we're talking about them expanding upon mechanics and other features. But what do you think of the points of interest so far? We have the radar dome, we have the geothermal plant. They're talking about a volcano being there.
They seem to have put a lot of details into the port cities as well. That to me is a big thing, because I know Chinaris, as good as it is, it can sometimes just it doesn't feel as put together as it could be. I think Livonia hits it more, especially in the north. I think the south, prior to the update in what was it 119, I think didn't really have a lot. But I think the points of interest in this, they've made sure to make the map stand out. And I think that's something that they learned as well from the previous maps. As I've said, they need things that sort of, when you look at Sakhal, you can immediately go, that's Sakhal. You know, like not just the snow that's obviously going to be there, because there are many winter maps and there are many mods that you can add for the maps that are there, the official maps that add a winter feel to them, and so on and so forth. So I think by adding these special buildings, these brand new assets, and making these points of interest, like the port cities, which I imagine a lot of people are going to spend quite some time at, then it just makes the whole thing more enjoyable and more fun. And it was something I was really worried about, because when they first announced Sakhal, it didn't look like there was going to be much difference there. It looked like the assets were going to be reused. And I listened to the community. The community also had these concerns, and I discussed them a little bit. But what I did say in the video I discussed them was, the thing about the DayZ team is they listen to player feedback. So if they don't have this planned, they probably will. It's the one thing that makes them stand out against so many other developers. They absolutely listen. Whether or not you agree with what they listen to is personal.
So I'm actually excited to see more of what they're doing to these points of interest to not only make them more, I want to go there for a reason, but also to make you feel more immersed. And one of the things that makes people feel more immersed in some of these new maps is having weapons, vehicles, and other gear specifically designed just for this map, such as like I think they had the ski gloves and a couple of other items we saw. But what do you think the new potential for some of the items are, and what would you like to see in Shakal versus the other maps?
So that's pretty interesting. And yes, I would expect that we're going to get some new clothing items, especially with the more extreme weather and biomes there. But realistically, I wouldn't get our hopes too high as far as fancy new weapons that are anything more than just a new model and maybe some different bullet mechanics. Same thing with vehicles. And this isn't so much a diss on Bohemia, but more around the time frame that they're releasing this map and DLC. They don't really have the dev time to build out some new vehicle that has different kind of mechanics than what they've already put in place, or a different kind of weapon that has, different bullet mechanics or different functional mechanics than what they've already developed. So I would say, some interesting clothing items, some stuff that matches the environment, but I just want to make sure we're setting our expectations realistically.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. I don't think we're going to get that many new added things like content wise in that way, because you have to remember as well, they're adding an entire new map. That is the new content.
We've talked a lot about Frostline expansion, what we're expecting, and what we're assuming may happen. Of course, none of this is set in stone. We don't have any insider information. But AlwaysStreams, do you have any final thoughts on what's upcoming for the Frostline expansion and or possibly for DayZ itself?
I think the new DLC is going to really mark a changing point in DayZ, because right now we have a sort of problem with DayZ, and what it is the devs keep releasing all of these fixes and all of these patches, thousands of fixes, thousands of bug glitches, and so on and so forth, but people don't really see them. They're not something that they can experience, although they're all in the patch notes. People don't really read them. Whereas with this DLC, this is something that people can really experience. It's something that people are going to have, and it's going to alter their opinion. And I think that that's why it's going to be a bit of a turning point, and people are going to realize that the DayZ devs are taking DayZ extremely seriously. They are putting a lot of effort, a lot of work, and they are actually doing everything that people are asking for. And maybe by releasing this map, if it is everything that we hope it is, and it's going to be, but based on what we've seen, it looks like it will be. And I think it's definitely going to change the opinion of a lot of negative Nancy's and show that DayZ is really, really the legacy game and the trendsetter.
My thoughts on that is, my prediction is, depending on when this gets released, which I'm assuming is going to be, into early Q4, so the kind of October timeframe, in time to ramp up for Christmas. By the time we hit the holiday season, I think there's going to be significant growth on the console side and moderate to lukewarm growth on the PC side. I think the console is really going to be where it's at in this initial first 6 to 9 months after Frostline is released.
Well, folks, this is the State of Survival, and we were just talking about our assumptions and presumptions on what is coming in DayZ Frostline coming up in the next coming months. Enough about DayZ and us. What about you, AlwaysStreams? What's going on in your world?
So recently I've started getting into shorts, and I've started making shorts about different things. Maybe things people don't know about DayZ, maybe some interesting behind the scenes information, some speculation, and some systems that nobody ever really talks about. And you can find that on my YouTube, AlwaysStreams, and I upload basically every day. So you're always getting something new just by subscribing and following.
You guys can check him out by just typing AlwaysStreams in YouTube, or you can click on his links below. He covers a wide variety of DayZ content, from opinion pieces to tutorials to how-tos, and even covers servers every now and then. He's a pretty down-to-earth guy, but make sure you always keep him in check. Thank you for watching State of Survival. You all have a wonderful day.
Bye.